Welcome to my YouTube channel. My guest on Facing the Canon is Dr. Dan Strange, author of Making Faith Magnetic. Dan Strange, welcome to Facing the Canon.
That's great to be here, J.John.
Good to have you. Let's start with your name. So your parents, tell us about your parents.
Yeah, so my dad was originally from Guyana in South America. So it's a little country at the top. We know it because when England play cricket, Guyana is counted as the West Indies. So my dad was Guyanese, and that when it was still owned by the British. And my dad's great-grandparents would have been indentured workers from India who had been brought up to Guyana. But my dad left the village when he was young, ended up in the UK, married my mum. But the thing about my name is that my dad's name was not Strange. He was not born with the name Strange. He chose the name Strange.
So what was his name?
Prashad, which is a very kind of Indian name. And in fact, my mum and dad, I think, were thinking they were going to call me Devindra. So I could be here as Devindra Prashad, not Dan Strange. My dad was kind of quite a complex character. We tried to ask him, why did you choose the name Strange? He never really gave us a good reason. He died about 10 years ago. But yeah,
but he found it appealing.
He must have done.
But out of all the names that you could have chosen.
I know, well, we've thought about what could be the reasons. Maybe it was because Peter Sellers' film Dr. Strangelove, but then
yes.
why wouldn't I be called Strangelove? I don't know.
Or maybe he felt, this is quite strange that I'm feeling the need to change my name.
Well, maybe. So, yeah, so it's especially when now with obviously the Doctor Strange Marvel comics and the movies, especially when I'm doing kind of American podcasts, they can't believe there's someone called Strange, and then I'm a doctor, and my middle name is Stephen, which is Doctor Strange's
Doctor Strange.
name. And then my wife's a psychologist; she's a doctor as well. So 2 Doctor Stranges. So there you go.
There you go.
The jokes are unending.
Dan, what was life like growing up in your family?
Yeah, so my mum went to an Anglican church, and there was no youth group there. So we ended up going to the local Baptist church. I come from Southend-on-Sea,
yes,
in Essex, and joined the Boys Brigade. And I was converted through the Boys Brigade when I was 16. I think my dad would call himself culturally Hindu. His parents were Hindu believers, but he never really was committed, but he was culturally. So we sometimes would watch the kind of English version of the Bhagavad Gita, and we'd eat potato and egg curry, and my dad was like, but when I used to preach at church, he used to come and listen, and but really, yeah, we got stuck into the Boys Brigade, and that's where we grew up, from the Anchor Boys all the way through, and this would have been kind of the mid-80s, yeah.
Dan, was it at the Boys Brigade that you became a Christian?
Yes, I think I thought I was a Christian, and the social circle at the Boys Brigade was great. I mean, that was my life for many years. And then, the person who would become my wife and also my best friend, they both became Christians the year before me. And then I realised I didn't think I was a Christian. And then it was a very normal Sunday service in the morning, and our pastor there was preaching. And then in the evening, I just realised it wasn't a kind of an extra special oomph of kind of gospel content. That's the new birth, isn't it? I just realised, hey, this is true. I need to come to Jesus. And so I still remember, when you have that photograph in your mind of something that's happened, kneeling on the floor in my minister's study. He had that big Holman Hunt, The Light of the World picture.
Light of the World.
Looking at tears streaming down my face and saying, I need to know who Jesus is. I need to know you. And that day I was converted. I was 16. Yeah.
And did that change the future for you?
Yeah, I think I'd always been, because I think of my dad's background, and I think I'd always been interested in study and theology, and especially other religions now that I was a Christian. And so I think I realised I wanted to go and study theology. I took a year out and worked as a missionary volunteer with the Baptist Missionary Society in Italy, knowing that I was going to go and study theology at Bristol. But that really started a career in studying theology, academia. I mean, it wasn't a great experience of theology at Bristol, but the Lord set me up to be able to work with theology students. So yeah, that's how that kind of career path happened.
And you went on and did a doctorate. What did you do your doctorate in?
Yeah, so I was really interested in the question, and this actually was a question posed by my mum's mum about what happens to people who never hear the gospel, which is, as you will know, I mean, you've probably been asked that question
Many
of times. And so I was looking at particular ways in which Christians have answered that question, especially some people who believe that people could be saved by Jesus without knowing him. So that's a whole big discussion that's been going on. So I spent 3 years looking at that question and a particular figure who was writing at the time, but just theology in general. So Christianity's relationship with other religions has always been my real interest. And then over the years, as we'll say, it's kind of morphed more into kind of how do we engage culture more generally. But I still have a soft spot for thinking about what do Christians say about other religions, and what are they, and what's that relationship? I'm very passionate about that question.
Absolutely. You were on the staff of Oak Hill Theological College.
Yes.
And what did you teach there?
So after I finished my PhD, I did 5 years with UCCF working just with theological students, so going up and down the country, trying to encourage Bible-believing Christians who were maybe realising that studying theology at university was not quite what they expected. And that was great. I mean, the Lord had prepared me to do that work, given my experiences. And then David Peterson, who was the principal of Oak Hill, which is a college in North London, he phoned me up and he said, we're advertising for a job in something called public theology. I don't know what it is, but I want you to apply for it. I didn't know what it was, but the whole area of Christian engagement in society, and then stuff on evangelism and apologetics and understanding culture. So for the last 16 years, I've been teaching in that area, training people who are going to be going to be church leaders in the Church of England and independent churches. And then, as with all these things, after a while, you start having more leadership, administrative responsibilities. So I was vice principal, and then acting principal, and then director. And I have been doing that up until September. I was lecturing there. Yeah.
And what are you doing now?
Well, yeah. So after 16 years, I felt the Lord was moving us on. And there's an organisation called Crosslands, which was a kind of a partnership between Oak Hill College and a church planting network called Acts 29, you may have heard of.
Yes.
And that had been in existence for 4 or 5 years. I'd been involved with that from the beginning as a trustee and on the faculty. And I just thought this whole area of cultural engagement and how do we really get traction in our society, I thought it was time to kind of say, well, let's try and start something new. So within Crosslands now, Crosslands has about 120 students. We do lots of different training at all levels. I've started something called Crosslands Forum, which is a centre for cultural engagement and missional innovation, and we're focusing on research and resources and trying to build relationships, trying to equip the church, equip people in the local church to talk about Jesus. Our vision at Crosslands is that there can be training opportunities from when someone first gets converted through to the highest level of PhD and everything in between. Because we think theological education is so important, and especially with that outwards focus of how do we engage the culture that we're in around us.
Absolutely. You've written, Dan, a number of books, and here's one of them, Making Faith Magnetic. And I thoroughly enjoyed reading this, and in fact I've endorsed it as well because I found it very inspiring and stimulating. So the question is, making faith magnetic. How do we make faith magnetic?
I think the premise of the book is, I think sometimes as Christians, especially in the West, we're struggling to get traction with where people are at. As in sometimes we're really pleased if people are antagonistic about our faith. The fact is often we're just kind of not getting any traction. People are living their lives. We've got this great news to tell. And so the book is trying to explore, what does the Bible say about human beings in a way that we can really then understand them and get stickiness to have that traction tethered to God's word. So the book is an exploration of, I think, certain, how might you call it, itches that all human beings have. And it's based on the work of a very famous missiologist, someone who was a missionary in Indonesia in the middle of the 20th century, a guy called J.H. Bavink. and he was a missionary, and he knew his Bible very well, and he knew other religions very well. And he said, look, there are these questions that all human beings seem to ask. They're these itches that everyone has to scratch. And he calls them magnetic points.
Yes.
So what I've tried to do in the book is take that framework. In Bavinck's day, he was applying that to Hinduism and Buddhism and Islam. I've tried to transpose that into our post-Christian, secular, Western context and tried to say, look, it's the same people made in the image of God who are running to God and running away from God, who know him and don't know him. All human beings are religious. That's what Paul says in Acts 17. And so what I try to do is give the framework and then give examples of these 5 magnetic points that all human beings are asking. And then that's the first half of the book. And the second half of the book is then saying, how does this connect to the gospel of Jesus Christ?
So, Dan, the 5 magnetic points, can you highlight those for us?
Yeah. So the first question is a totality. It's called, all human beings ask or live out, is there a way to connect? We want to be connected to something. If we're not connected, we feel insignificant. And but when we connect to something bigger, we feel part of something bigger. And that can be, it could be social media, it could be Comic-Con, it could be a football, all of these different ways in which we're looking for connection. And I think we're all looking for connection. I think the pandemic has only re-emphasized that. And when we don't feel connected, we feel disconnected. So this idea of totality, connection is important. Is there a way to connect?
So when we don't feel connected, Dan, and we feel disconnected, what are the symptoms of that?
Oh, I think we crave for connection again and again. And so we're always flip-flopping between thinking, who am I? I'm just an insignificant nothing. I'm just a speck in the universe, or what's my place? We don't have a sense of identity, but we try and get identity when we connect with something bigger. And that can be family, it can be the land, it can be a social interest group, it can be a football club, it can be all kinds of things, but we all crave some kind of connection.
So if we don't have the connection, what are the implications of not having those connections? I
just think as human beings, we know at the end of the day that we are connected to something or someone else. We find it very difficult to be alone, and so we're always looking to kind of find our identity in something else that's bigger than us, because I think at the end of the day we know that we are finite human beings.
Yes.
We're just little things, but when we connect with something bigger, suddenly we feel as if we're part of something, and that's important, and everyone's craving for that all over the place. And what the book tries to do is just give examples of that. The second point is...
So on that first point, Dan, it reminds me of that verse that God has placed eternity in our hearts,
yes,
hasn't he?
Yeah.
And there's this yearning.
Yes, because we know that we as Christians, we know that everyone's made in the image of God, and we're not meant to be alone.
Absolutely.
In terms of our relationship with God, our relationship with each other, our connection with the earth. Adan means from the earth. We are meant to be connected to our world. So all of these ways in which we look for connection are in some ways natural, but what we do as we suppress the truth and as we run away from God is that we make those kinds of connections ultimate. And that's where the problem starts to be. That's when we're scratching the itch and it's just getting redder because it's not doing what it should do. Yeah. The second magnetic point is the norm. Is there a way to live? I think everyone realizes that there are standards or norms that we need to kind of reach and that you can make or break. Some you might think, well, this guy Bavinck, he's writing in the 20th century. Maybe people believed in the 10 Commandments and they don't anymore. It's not about the 10 Commandments. It's about that everyone has a standard or these rules. And we know, I think we're seeing at the moment what's called cancel culture. We've set the bar really high. Because when we've set the bar for human beings, and when people don't match that, there's a problem. There's a great writer called a philosopher called Charles Taylor who said that we thought that humanists thought that they were doing the world a favour by getting rid of the idea of sin or total depravity, all these Christian doctrines about how bad we are. The problem is if you take those doctrines away, we set the bar so high that when we can't reach that bar, what do? We have to we get angry. We have to then coerce people to fit this standard. but that we have a standard. Even people, I say this in the book, I give the example of even subcultures or people who are against the culture still have to conform. So I use the example of a friend of mine who was a goth when they were growing up. And there's still very close rules about how to be a goth.
Yes.
So everyone has to rebel, but people have to rebel in the same way. So we all have this norm. And so the norm of Magnetic Point says, is there a way to live? All of us have particular standards. And the question is, where do those standards come from?
Yes, where do they come from?
Yeah.
Where do they come from?
Well, I mean, that's the thing. I think as a Christian, they come from the fact that we do have eternity written in our hearts. We've been made to worship God. I think, though, if you don't have that, you're pulling things out of thin air, really, in the sense of where those standards come from. Maybe it's parents, maybe it's cultural, but we all have to. And again, it fits into the first point again, because it's those norms that give us a sense of whether we're in or out, that sense of belonging or not.
What is driving, Dan? What is driving cancel culture and all that's related with that?
I think it's I think it is the idea that we know that there is a standard. We know that there are ways to live. The problem is that there is no there's a standard. The problem, there isn't a saviour when we fall from the standard. It's not 3 strikes and you're out. It's 1 strike and you're out. And so it's that idea. In that sense, from a Christian point of view, and this sounds a bit weird, but the idea of sin, that we're not perfect, that something has gone wrong, is actually good news.
Yes.
Because it actually says human beings aren't perfect, something has gone wrong, what are we going to do about that? Cancel culture, if it just keeps on saying, well, human beings are good, they should be meeting these standards, and they can't, and it just excludes others. So that norm, I think we live in a hyper norm culture at the moment. And where is forgiveness? Where is reconciliation?
Yes. Number 3. What's
Number
that?
3 is there a way out? Deliverance. I think all human beings recognise that something is not right with the world. The world isn't as it should be. The question is, why isn't it? And more importantly, can we be delivered from it? And whether it's the mini deliverances that people live, how do I just get through the day, through to the big questions of, how can I know I'm going to die? There's a constant question of deliverance. And some of it is not just a looking forward, it's a looking back. It's what C.S. Lewis talks about, this idea of sehnsucht, a kind of a longing. I give the example that in the 18th and 19th century, the Romantics, the Romantic poets, and the Romantic artists, they built ruins, because the idea was it reminded them of a golden age. And I think there's a lot of nostalgia, isn't there, of looking back. And there's a lot of looking forward as to, I know I'm going to die, can I be delivered from that? How do I live my life? So this idea of deliverance, the problem, as I've said, is that we can't agree on what the problem is, let alone whether there's a solution to the problem. But the fact that we do look for deliverance is, I think, another one of these magnetic points. Again, getting through the day, through to these big questions of, can I be delivered from the ultimate question of, I'm going to die? What does that mean?
And it is obvious that we need some kind of deliverance. And the word deliverance implies that there's a sense of oppression that we need to be freed from.
And that's where I think, I mean, it's, in some ways, the deliverance one is so ripe for kind of gospel conversation. In the example I give, a pastor friend of mine was on a dog walk, and they met someone else walking their dog, and this was a guy who'd recently been bereaved. He'd been dabbling in spiritualist things, and he said, look, I if only someone could come back from the other side and tell us what was on the other side of death. Now, isn't that a great opportunity to say something about the resurrection? So I do think there are, and I think, the pandemic has only made those kinds of questions but there's more opportunities to speak into that.
Absolutely. But of course, as Christians, we know that Jesus is the deliverer.
Yes, of course, yeah.
And he is the one who sets us free.
Exactly.
And if you know the truth will set you free.
And it's liberating.
It's liberating. And obviously, people don't know the truth.
Yeah.
Okay, number 4.
Yeah, the 4th one's my favourite one. I know you shouldn't have favourite children, but this is my favourite one.
Yes.
This is called destiny. Is there a way we control? Bavinck has this great line where he says, we all realise that we both lead our lives and undergo our lives at the same time. We're told, aren't we, you can be who you want to be, you can be a master of your own destiny. And then at other times we think, I'm just a cog in the machine, there's puppet strings and I'm just being told what to do. I can give you a great example of this that's not in the book, so this is the material. I've been doing some training for Newcastle University for their Christian Union Events Week. And I was asking them, what is it that first year Newcastle University students are struggling? What would be some of the cultural things that they're dealing with? And there were two things that they said, both things kind of show this magnetic point. On the one hand, a lot of the students are into this phenomenon called manifesting, where if you think of something, it will happen. Literally, it's trying to think positive thoughts. So one of the CU's housemates they thought they'd manifested their boyfriend. They wanted a boyfriend, they thought about the boyfriend, and the boyfriend turned up. That's manifesting. It's to do with crystals, and it's the power of positive thinking. It's creating reality. So this was all the rage. On the other hand, what was the other thing that the Newcastle students were dealing with in Freshers Week was people weren't going out because of the fear of injection spiking, this terrible thing that's going on in nightclubs where people are being injected, date rape drugs and all of these things. And that was where they thought they didn't have any control. So on the one hand, the two big issues for Newcastle University students are manifesting on the one hand and injection spiking on the other. And you think that exactly describes what this destiny point is all about. We think we're in control. We think we are masters of the universe. We can do anything. We can construct reality how we want to. And at the same time, we're fearful to go out because we don't want to be controlled and we don't have any control and we're scared. And I think the way that was brought home finally was just talking about with some of these Christian students with their non-Christian friends about what levels of anxiety and mental illness and all of these issues, which of course are very complex issues. But one of the issues that not a few students have said to me is, this is a generation that have been told from a very early age, you can change the world. You can do whatever you want to do. You're going to be world beaters. And then these students get to the first year at uni and they realise they can't. They're disenchanted, they're disillusioned. And the pressure that they've been put under is intolerable. And again, it's that leading and undergoing. So I love this magnetic point, and this brings into all kinds of issues of superstition and can we control things, and I give lots of examples of superstition in our culture. When people say religion is dying or people don't believe anymore, actually people believe in all kinds of things. All kinds of things. And as you will have seen. So that destiny one I do think is a really... has got lots of potential to develop this idea that we struggle with both leading our lives and undergoing our lives. That's the fourth point.
Absolutely. And there is a lot of superstition around. It's fascinating what people say, and they still, touch wood. And, if you pick up on that and say, why do you say that? Most people don't know. It's almost just become part of their vocabulary. But when you illuminate it and say, well, actually, there's only one piece of wood that has anything to say to us, and that's the one that Jesus died on.
Exactly.
So what's the fifth one?
Yeah, the fifth one is kind of the super magnetic point, and this is a higher power. In Bavinck's time, when he was in Indonesia, everyone believed in a god or gods, and then the question was, do these other magnetic points about connection and norm and deliverance, can this higher power do it? In our context, I think this is the point that's buried. You have to kind of get to it by asking the other points. But it's saying, at the end of the day, is there a reality behind the reality? You might call it God, you might just call it another reality. And the thing in the book I focus on, I think this is important, is that we can't do away with the idea of 2,000 years of Christian influence in the West. So this is the area where I talk about kind of what might be called secular religious experiences. Yes. A friend of mine went to the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem and their dad was an atheist and they felt something. Or the example I use in the book, which I love, is this example called champing. Have you heard champing?
Yes.
Is these churches where no one's going to them and they're derelict, but they're being rented out so people can sleep in the church and camp in the church to have a kind of an experience of waking up with the light coming through the stained glass window. And it kind of, it's trying to... it's kind of convoluted, trying to force religious experiences. And I do think is that question, human beings find it very hard to agree with John Lennon that above us is only sky, as you imagine. And it has to come out somewhere. And lots of writers have talked about this. The secular is haunted, or this book by Julian Barnes, who's an atheist writer, who started his book Nothing to be Scared of by saying, I don't believe in God, but I miss him. And for all of the kind of hardcore atheists that are around, I think I don't believe in God, but I miss him. I think there's a lot of that sense still around.
There is,
and that's we need to recognise that, and then try to say, well, how does the gospel connect and confront all of these magnetic points?
It's great to have a diagnosis, and often we don't do that. Sometimes we go straight to the remedy, don't we?
Yeah.
But when you have a proper diagnosis, you can actually understand the right remedy.
Yeah.
And of course, the remedy to all of these magnetic points is
Jesus Christ. So he is the one who offers us connection. He is the norm. He is the deliverer. He is the one in control. He is the way, the truth, and the life. And what I try to do in the book, there's a particular way I try to articulate that the gospel of Jesus Christ always kind of confronts and connects at the same time. We need to realize, we need to show people that the way we're looking for connection, the way we're looking for the norm, the way we're looking for deliverance, the way we're looking for control, we're all looking in the wrong places, and that has implications in terms of our relationship with God. That's terrible. Our relationship with each other, the relationship with the world, and we have to kind of expose that for people's own good. There's a passage in Jeremiah, isn't there, where talking about the covenant people, how much outside my people have committed two sins. They've turned from the fount of living water, and they've turned to cisterns or cracked pots that cannot hold water. And really, without the Lord Jesus Christ, people are trying to get water from a cracked cistern, and it's dirty and stagnant. And we've got this fountain of living water to show them. But there's such a connection there, because what I'm trying to say is these magnetic points that everyone is living through or living with their lives, Jesus is the answer. He confronts and connects, just as Paul wandered around the objects of worship in Acts 17. Or Paul says in 1 Corinthians, Jews look for power, Greeks look for wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews, foolishness to Greeks, but to those who have been saved, both Jews and Greeks, Christ the power of God and the wisdom of God. So what I'm encouraging people to do is to think, where are your non-Christian friends and family? Where are they manifesting these particular magnetic points? And then how do we naturally say something about Jesus? Because these should be hooks to be able to, or give us the traction we need to naturally say something about the Lord.
Absolutely. Dan, you're an absolute tonic. And thank you so much for joining us on Facing the Canon. Making faith magnetic. I hope that has inspired you. It certainly has stimulated me and stirred me. Thank you so much for joining us on Facing the Canon. Please join us again.